Do not mistake what unfolds today for another ordinary movement across the sky. If you dismiss this moment as just another astrological headline, you may overlook one of the most psychologically significant turning points in recent history. On July 7th, Neptune reaches its retrograde station at 4 degrees and 25 minutes of Aries. This is the same Neptune that quietly governs every illusion you have accepted, every impossible dream you convinced yourself would somehow survive without change, every comforting story your mind created whenever reality felt too painful to face. The instant Neptune appears to stand still before reversing its direction, something invisible begins shifting inside the human experience. The haze that once softened uncomfortable truths no longer protects you. Instead, it begins disappearing piece by piece until what remains can no longer be ignored. For 3 zodiac signs, this process will arrive with extraordinary force. It will not resemble a gentle spiritual awakening or a subtle emotional realization. It will feel more like an unavoidable confrontation between the life they believed they were living and the truth that has patiently waited beneath the surface for months. If you belong to one of these signs, the universe is no longer interested in protecting your comfort. It is interested in revealing what your own heart has been avoiding. That realization may feel uncomfortable at first, yet it also carries the potential to become the very moment your future begins changing. What many people fail to recognize is that this chapter did not suddenly appear today. The visible event may be happening now, but its roots stretch backward into March, when the first invisible threads were quietly woven beneath everyday life. Perhaps you have sensed that something has been building without understanding why. Maybe an unexplained tension has followed you from morning until night. Perhaps you have struggled to shake an inner feeling that something important was approaching, even though no obvious evidence existed. That sensation was not your imagination. A deeper process has been unfolding beneath the surface, preparing you for this exact turning point. Later, the reason behind that growing pressure becomes unmistakably clear, because one specific sequence of events has been quietly tightening the emotional atmosphere around you. Before arriving there, however, you need to understand why this retrograde cannot be compared with the ones people casually discuss every year. This moment belongs to a cycle that reaches back more than 150 years, and that historical distance changes the meaning of everything now taking place. Most people hear the word retrograde and immediately think about Mercury. Their minds jump toward delayed travel, technological confusion, missed messages, or frustrating misunderstandings. Neptune operates on an entirely different level. It rarely interferes with appointments or schedules. Instead, it reaches into perception itself. Neptune governs dreams, spiritual awareness, imagination, invisible dimensions, and the vast collective unconscious that quietly influences humanity. Yet hidden within those beautiful qualities exists another side that is far more difficult to confront. Neptune also rules illusion, deception, wishful thinking, and every internal narrative people create so they never have to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. During the previous 14 years, Neptune traveled through Pisces, the sign it naturally rules. While moving through those waters, boundaries became increasingly difficult to define. Emotions blended together. Spirituality expanded. Fantasy and reality slowly intertwined until many people could no longer recognize where one ended and the other began. Countless individuals drifted through life, believing they understood themselves while unknowingly living inside stories that felt emotionally satisfying rather than objectively true. That long chapter has now changed because Neptune has crossed into Aries. This transition carries extraordinary weight because Neptune has not occupied Aries since the 1860s. That is not an exaggeration. The last period shaped by this combination unfolded during an era marked by civil wars, fierce struggles over personal sovereignty, and profound ideological conflict. Humanity was forced to redefine identity through confrontation rather than comfort. Those years did not politely suggest transformation. They demanded it without compromise. Now that same archetypal current returns, inviting another generation to examine what it truly means to stand as an individual. Yet Neptune does not express itself gently inside Aries. Neptune naturally dissolves boundaries, softens identity, and encourages surrender beyond the ego. Aries moves in the opposite direction. Aries seeks independence, action, courage, and the determination to exist according to personal truth. It is the warrior who refuses to disappear. When Neptune enters that fiery landscape, limitless spiritual energy becomes filtered through the instincts of survival, assertion, and self-definition. These two forces naturally pull against each other. One asks you to release the ego. The other insists that the self must fight to exist. That contradiction creates one of the most psychologically intense combinations found in astrology. Once Neptune reaches its retrograde station within that environment, the pressure no longer remains hidden beneath everyday distractions. The illusions supporting outdated beliefs begin collapsing from the inside. What once appeared stable starts revealing fractures that can no longer remain concealed. By the time awareness arrives, the internal process has already begun. The event itself is not the beginning. It is simply the moment you finally notice what has been happening all along. Yet Neptune did not reach this turning point by itself. Another cosmic event prepared the stage before today's reversal ever arrived. The catalyst appeared on July 4th, only 3 days earlier, when Mars met Uranus at 3 degrees and 52 minutes of Gemini. Mars represents decisive action, separation, and the force that cuts through hesitation. Uranus symbolizes sudden breakthroughs, rebellion, unexpected disruption, and revelations that strike without warning. Joined together inside Gemini, the sign associated with communication, knowledge, and information exchange, these planets generated an explosive, energetic atmosphere capable of changing perception in an instant. Think carefully about the last several days. Did unexpected news arrive without warning? Did one conversation completely alter the direction of your thinking? Did hidden information suddenly surface? Did a realization emerge so abruptly that it left you sitting in complete silence while your understanding of a situation transformed before your eyes? None of those experiences should automatically be dismissed as coincidence. They reflected the ignition point of a much larger process. Mars rules Aries, and Aries is precisely where Neptune now stands. Because of that relationship, whatever Mars activates directly influences the foundation beneath Neptune. When Mars collided with Uranus on July 4th, the result extended far beyond temporary disruption. That powerful alignment destabilized the very framework supporting every illusion Neptune had quietly been constructing since its entrance into Aries. The explosion has already occurred. The consequences are only beginning to reveal themselves. And what comes next will determine who is willing to face reality and who continues trying to hold together a version of life that can no longer survive. What shattered first was the illusion of stability. What arrives today is the understanding of why it had to fall apart in the first place. If the last several days have left you wondering why events unfolded with such unexpected intensity, the answer begins to reveal itself now. Immediately after the powerful meeting between Mars and Uranus, Mars continued its journey by forming supportive aspects with both Neptune and Pluto across July 4th and July 5th. That sequence is far more significant than it may appear at first glance. The disruption was never random, and it was never punishment disguised as fate. Every unexpected conversation, every uncomfortable realization, every emotional disruption was part of a carefully orchestrated process designed to remove what could no longer support your growth. Before anything authentic could be created, something false had to be dismantled. The universe was not interested in creating meaningless chaos. It was carrying out deliberate reconstruction by first exposing foundations that were no longer capable of holding the life you are trying to build. Yet rebuilding cannot begin while illusion still occupies the space where truth is meant to stand. That is why today feels so decisive. The unveiling comes only after the demolition has already started. Although every zodiac sign will notice Neptune changing direction somewhere within their lives, no one remains completely untouched by a retrograde of this magnitude. There are 3 signs standing where the pressure is concentrated most intensely. Those signs are Aries, Cancer, and Libra. The reason has everything to do with Neptune reaching its retrograde station at 4 degrees of Aries. Astrology teaches that the most transformative aspects are the conjunction, the square, and the opposition. These are not quiet influences that gently encourage reflection. They are powerful alignments that create circumstances impossible to ignore. They demand movement where stagnation has existed. They expose what denial has hidden. They force decisions that can no longer be postponed. Aries experiences the conjunction, Cancer encounters the square, and Libra receives the opposition. Each aspect acts like a different form of pressure, yet they all lead toward the same destination: the collapse of illusions that have quietly shaped reality for months. When Neptune pauses upon these sensitive points before turning backward, the comforting stories each sign has relied upon begin falling away. What remains afterward may initially feel uncomfortable, but it carries something far more valuable than comfort. It carries clarity stripped of distortion. Let us begin with Aries, because this is where Neptune's influence reaches the deepest layer of personal identity. If your sun, moon, or rising sign falls in Aries, Neptune is stationing directly upon the first house, the symbolic space representing who you believe yourself to be, how you move through the world, how others experience your presence, and the identity that quietly guides every decision you make. Over recent months, something inside you has likely felt awakened. Perhaps an entirely new direction appeared before you with extraordinary intensity. Perhaps inspiration arrived carrying such emotional conviction that questioning it never even crossed your mind. You may have believed you had finally discovered your true mission, your highest purpose, or a calling that demanded immediate action. Everything seemed charged with spiritual meaning. Every instinct felt undeniable. Every impulse appeared worthy of pursuit. Yet today introduces a different perspective. As Neptune begins moving backward, the mist surrounding those convictions slowly disappears. You may suddenly recognize that not every passionate feeling represented genuine inner wisdom. One of Neptune's most persuasive illusions inside Aries is convincing you that every personal desire automatically reflects divine guidance. The emotional excitement you experienced may not have been intuition at all. It may have been adrenaline wearing the mask of certainty. The urgency pushing you forward may have originated from unresolved inner restlessness rather than authentic spiritual direction. Some of the conflicts you entered so confidently may never have belonged to your path. Some causes that demanded your energy may have distracted you from the work your soul was actually asking you to do. They appeared meaningful because illusion often dresses itself in language that feels sacred. That is why Neptune's retrograde becomes so powerful. The reflection staring back at you no longer mirrors the version of yourself you prefer to believe. Instead, it quietly reveals the person who has existed beneath performance, ambition, and emotional self-protection all along. For many Aries individuals, this realization arrives with startling force. Confidence built upon illusion begins dissolving. The carefully maintained image you unconsciously created to earn validation, protect vulnerability, or avoid confronting emotional emptiness starts losing its structure. Layers that once felt permanent begin disappearing one by one. Because Mars had already activated Uranus on July 4th, This shift may unfold with remarkable speed. Something that completely consumed your attention only days ago may suddenly lose all emotional power. Physical exhaustion may appear without warning, forcing you to stop when you believed you could continue indefinitely. A conversation or confrontation may completely alter the way you understand yourself. What once felt unquestionably true suddenly appears unfamiliar. This is not evidence that the universe has turned against you. Quite the opposite. It represents an invitation to answer perhaps the most important question you will encounter this year. Are your choices truly arising from your deepest authentic nature, or have you been moving constantly simply to avoid emotions you never wanted to experience? The answer may feel uncomfortable, yet it also contains the freedom you have unknowingly searched for. Adding even greater significance to this process is Saturn's current presence in Aries, as it moves toward its own retrograde station on July 26th. Saturn removes opportunities to escape responsibility through comforting fantasies. It insists upon maturity, discipline, and honest self-examination. Every illusion you willingly accepted now asks to be acknowledged. Every story you participated in becomes your responsibility to examine. Accountability becomes unavoidable, not as punishment, but as the doorway toward genuine strength. A true spiritual warrior does not measure courage by avoiding painful truths. Real courage is revealed through the willingness to remain present while illusion falls apart, especially when the truth challenges everything you believed about yourself. Then the focus shifts toward Cancer, and this is where the pressure that has quietly existed beneath everyday life finally begins revealing its purpose. Earlier, it was mentioned that this moment has been developing since March, and for Cancer, that timeline becomes especially meaningful. Neptune entered its pre-retrograde shadow on March 15th, meaning the themes reaching their climax today have been slowly unfolding for nearly 4 months. You may not have been able to explain why dissatisfaction kept returning despite outward stability. Perhaps everything looked successful from the outside, while something deep within refused to feel settled. Perhaps your professional direction, long-term ambitions, public responsibilities, or career path began creating subtle emotional discomfort that could never quite be ignored. The feeling arrived gradually rather than dramatically, making it easy to dismiss at first. Yet month after month, that quiet inner tension continued growing, preparing you for the truth that is now beginning to surface. For months, something inside you has quietly questioned whether the direction receiving your greatest effort is truly the destination your soul has been seeking. You may have ignored that whisper because everything appeared logical on the surface. The responsibilities made sense. The goals looked impressive. The progress seemed visible to everyone around you. Yet no matter how much energy you continued investing, an unspoken feeling refused to disappear. That lingering discomfort reaches its turning point now. For Cancer, Neptune stations retrograde within the 10th house, the realm connected with career, public standing, authority, achievement, and the image you present to the outside world. The square Neptune forms to your sign does not offer gentle encouragement or subtle reflection. A square creates tension that demands resolution. It forces two realities that have been competing beneath the surface to confront each other until only one can remain. That is exactly what begins unfolding today. Over recent months, you may have devoted yourself completely to a professional dream, a position of influence, a vision of success that appeared radiant from the outside. Perhaps you became so captivated by where that path seemed capable of leading that you stopped asking whether it truly nourished your inner life. Maybe recognition became easier to measure than fulfillment. Maybe admiration from others slowly replaced the deeper question of whether your heart actually felt alive while pursuing those ambitions. There is also another possibility, one that may be more difficult to acknowledge. Your work may have become a refuge from emotions you never wanted to face, Remaining busy allowed you to postpone healing wounds that existed long before your career became the center of your attention. Achievement can sometimes become a carefully constructed shelter, where unresolved pain remains hidden behind productivity. Neptune has quietly illuminated that possibility for months, yet now its retrograde begins removing the beautiful glow surrounding that professional story. As the illusion dissolves, what remains is reality in its simplest form. That reality may bear little resemblance to the dream you believed you were building. Some Cancer individuals may suddenly recognize that the career demanding so much sacrifice no longer offers genuine spiritual nourishment. Others may discover that someone occupying a position of influence within their professional life, perhaps a supervisor, a mentor, or a business partner, is not the person they believed them to be. Hidden motives, blurred intentions, manipulation, or subtle deception that your intuition quietly sensed may finally become impossible to overlook. Deep inside, part of you already knew something was not entirely right, yet accepting the illusion often felt easier than confronting the uncertainty that truth would require. Today, that choice becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. This experience becomes even more emotionally significant because Mercury is retrograde in Cancer at the same time. Your attention naturally turns inward under this influence. Memories become louder. Emotional patterns from the past return, asking for recognition. Thoughts no longer remain detached observations. Every realization travels directly through your emotional body before reaching your conscious understanding. Mercury, moving backward through Cancer, refuses to let you solve this transformation through logic alone. Instead, every insight settles inside your nervous system. You do not merely understand what is changing, you physically experience it. The weight rests in your chest. The uncertainty echoes through your stomach. Your body begins speaking the truth before your mind fully accepts it. That is why this period feels impossible to ignore. On July 14th, the new moon in Cancer introduces the next chapter. That lunation offers the opportunity for renewal, but only after the outdated foundation has been released. Fresh beginnings cannot take root, while exhausted structures continue occupying the same space. The ambitions that were built upon illusion, emotional avoidance, or external validation must first be allowed to end before something genuinely aligned can emerge. The authority you have been searching for was never meant to come from status, recognition, or the approval of others. It grows from emotional integrity, from living in harmony with what you honestly feel instead of performing the role you believe the world expects you to play. That is the deeper lesson Neptune now places before Cancer, and embracing it becomes the first step toward creating a future that reflects who you truly are, rather than who you believed you needed to become. Then the attention turns toward Libra, where the revelation enters perhaps the most intimate area of life. This awakening may be deeply emotional, yet hidden within its discomfort exists the possibility of extraordinary freedom. Neptune stations retrograde in Libra's 7th house. The symbolic place governing committed partnerships, marriage, long-term relationships, agreements, and the significant people whose presence shapes your journey. Because Neptune now stands directly opposite Libra, the aspect formed is the opposition, one of astrology's most revealing mirrors. Oppositions expose what has been projected outward instead of recognized within. They reveal how the qualities we search for in others often reflect pieces of ourselves we have not fully acknowledged. For months, you may have been looking through a mirror that distorted what stood before you. Without realizing it, you may have woven an idealized image around someone important in your life. Their potential may have become more vivid than their actual behavior. You may have loved who they could become instead of honestly seeing who they consistently showed themselves to be. Hope may have quietly replaced observation. Possibility may have overshadowed reality. At the same time, you may have gradually placed your own needs further into the background, Preserving harmony may have seemed more important than expressing disappointment. Protecting the relationship may have felt safer than protecting your own emotional truth. The fear of conflict may have encouraged repeated compromise until your personal boundaries slowly disappeared without you fully noticing. Neptune possesses an extraordinary ability to soften reality with beautiful illusions, and for many months that influence has gently colored the way you experienced your closest relationship. Today, however, those comforting filters begin falling away. The perspective that replaces them may initially feel startling because it reveals what has always been present beneath the fantasy. This awakening is not subtle. It arrives as an unmistakable encounter with the truth of your most significant partnership. The dream no longer occupies the space where reality now stands. Suddenly, you recognize the difference between the person you imagined and the person consistently revealed through actions rather than possibilities. For some Libra individuals, those two images will no longer resemble each other at all. This retrograde exposes every place where you abandoned your own authenticity simply to preserve companionship. It highlights each moment when your boundaries were quietly crossed because solitude appeared more frightening than accepting treatment that failed to honor your worth. The realization may be painful, yet it also carries remarkable liberation. Once illusion disappears, you finally gain the opportunity to build relationships rooted in honesty instead of projection, mutual respect instead of silent sacrifice, and genuine connection instead of the exhausting effort required to keep a fantasy alive. There are moments when the greatest deception is not something another person does to you, but something you quietly continue telling yourself, because accepting the truth feels more frightening than maintaining the illusion. For some Libra individuals, this realization reaches even deeper than recognizing another person's shortcomings. It becomes the awareness that you have participated in preserving a relationship that your own intuition has been questioning for a long time. You may have convinced yourself that emotional exhaustion was proof of commitment. You may have mistaken repeated disappointment for patience, or interpreted unhealthy attachment as unconditional love. Little by little, you created explanations that allowed painful patterns to continue because they felt safer than facing the possibility that what you were protecting no longer deserved your protection. Neptune's retrograde removes those explanations one by one. What once appeared romantic may suddenly reveal itself as imbalance. What once seemed like loyalty may expose itself as self-abandonment. This process is not designed to create bitterness. It exists so you can finally separate genuine love from emotional sacrifice that slowly erased your own identity. The next major turning point arrives with the first quarter moon in Libra on July 21st. That lunation represents a crisis of action, meaning awareness alone will no longer be enough. The period of quietly observing what is wrong while postponing meaningful change reaches its conclusion. You will be asked to respond to what you have discovered. A decision, a conversation, a boundary, or a change in direction becomes increasingly difficult to avoid. Remaining passive is no longer supported by the energy surrounding this moment. At the same time, Saturn continues its journey through your relationship sector, steadily demanding maturity, responsibility, structure, and standards that cannot be negotiated away simply to preserve temporary harmony. Saturn asks difficult questions because it values lasting truth over temporary comfort. It encourages you to develop the kind of courage often associated with Aries, the willingness to choose authenticity even when that choice feels emotionally uncomfortable. That courage may require walking away from partnerships lacking a stable and honest foundation. It may require releasing attachment to someone's imagined future and beginning to evaluate them through the reality they consistently demonstrate today. Most importantly, it asks you to understand that authentic love never requires the disappearance of your own voice. Genuine partnership invites your complete presence rather than your gradual self-erasure. It welcomes honesty instead of performance. It strengthens individuality instead of demanding constant compromise. As Neptune's illusion fades, the fantasy of finding a flawless partner gradually disappears as well. Yet what replaces that fantasy is infinitely more valuable. You begin recognizing that the love you truly deserve is not built upon projection, wishful thinking, or endless potential. It is built upon truth, consistency, mutual respect, and the willingness of two people to meet each other exactly as they are, rather than as they hope the other might someday become. Beyond the experiences of Aries, Cancer, and Libra, however, an even larger pattern is quietly unfolding across the sky, one that transforms this month from merely important into something historically remarkable. Consider the remarkable numerical alignment taking place. Neptune reaches its retrograde station at 4 degrees and 25 minutes of Aries. Pluto is positioned at approximately 4 degrees of Aquarius. Uranus occupies 4 degrees and 23 minutes of Gemini. Jupiter stands at 4 degrees and 22 minutes of Leo. 4 of the slowest and most influential planets within our solar system are gathered around the same symbolic degree within their respective signs. Such an arrangement is extraordinarily uncommon. Rather than acting independently, these planets begin forming an interconnected network of supportive geometry extending throughout the zodiac. On July 15th, Uranus forms a sextile with Neptune. On July 20th, Jupiter creates a trine with Neptune. On July 25th, Neptune establishes a sextile with Pluto. These alignments are not isolated events without purpose. Together, they resemble an intricate framework, a carefully constructed cosmic architecture that provides support precisely when old structures begin collapsing. This changes the meaning of Neptune's retrograde completely. The revelations emerging now are not intended as punishment for believing the wrong things or trusting the wrong people. They are preparation for what comes next. Before something authentic can be established, illusion must first be removed. The universe is not clearing away false foundations simply to leave empty space behind. It is preparing the ground where something stronger, more truthful, more progressive, and far more expansive can finally take root. Every uncomfortable realization carries direction. Every painful ending points toward a destination. That destination is a version of your life built upon reality rather than imagination, integrity rather than illusion, and conscious choice rather than unconscious repetition. This is why the present moment deserves your full awareness. Neptune's retrograde extends across 158 days, continuing until December 12th. For approximately 5 months, life repeatedly returns to the same essential question. Is the world you have created supported by genuine truth, or is it resting upon foundations that cannot endure? During this period, grounding yourself physically becomes especially important. Neptune's watery influence, blending with the fiery nature of Aries, can create an experience of psychological drifting, where thoughts become hazy, emotions become overwhelming, and your connection with the present moment feels increasingly distant. The most effective response begins with the body itself. Walk outside. Move intentionally. Breathe deeply. Feel the earth beneath your feet. Return again and again to physical presence because your body becomes the anchor capable of steadying your awareness while emotional tides continue shifting around you. Equally important is the willingness to accept responsibility for your own participation in every illusion now dissolving. Whether the revelations concern identity, career, or relationships, resist the temptation to place every burden upon external circumstances or other people. One of the greatest opportunities hidden within this retrograde is recognizing the role you played in maintaining stories that no longer served your highest good. That recognition is not meant to create guilt. It creates freedom because the moment you acknowledge how the illusion was sustained, you also discover the power to stop sustaining it. For Cancer and Libra especially, Healthy boundaries become an essential part of this transformation. Neptune often encourages merging so completely with circumstances or other people that individual identity quietly disappears. Aries offers the healthy antidote through clear self-definition and the courage to say no when necessary. Sometimes protecting your peace creates temporary discomfort. Sometimes honoring your truth disappoints those who benefited from your silence. Yet that temporary discomfort becomes the pathway toward lasting authenticity. Ultimately, Neptune's retrograde carries one central message above every other lesson. Illusions are not removed because the universe wishes to diminish you. They are removed because your freedom cannot fully exist while fantasy continues replacing reality. Once the grief surrounding what you hoped would happen begins fading, something extraordinary becomes visible. What remains after illusion disappears is not emptiness. It is your authentic life, imperfect perhaps, deeply human. Certainly yet infinitely more meaningful than anything imagination alone could ever construct. Today Neptune stands still, and everything you have struggled not to acknowledge quietly steps into the light. The choice that remains belongs entirely to you. Will you retreat once more into familiar illusion, or will you allow yourself to witness the truth that has patiently waited beneath the surface all along? As the fog continues lifting, what appears before you is not the ending of your story. It is the beginning of the life that has been waiting for your willingness to finally see it clearly. If this message resonated with you and you found value in today's insight, thank you sincerely for staying until the end. If you would like to continue exploring these powerful astrological shifts together, consider subscribing so you do not miss future discussions. Your support truly means a great deal. You are also warmly invited to share your thoughts and personal experiences in the comments, because your perspective may encourage someone else walking a similar path. Until we meet again, take good care of yourself, and I look forward to seeing you in the next journey.